Hello everybody, welcome to episode 2 of Astro Basics, my impromptu, unscripted, and unfiltered series of videos where I'm just going to be chatting about thoughts and ideas I have about astrology for all levels. I'm going to kind of hopefully slowly bring it up, from the bottom. So that's why last time I started just talking about the planetary spheres, and today we're going to be talking about essential dignity, because this is a really fundamental concept, I think, that is something you learn very early on. You know, after you kind of plunge your way into the world of astrology, everyone's heard about the signs. Maybe a few more people have heard about the planets, if we're thinking about like the astrology iceberg, and it's like on the next deepest layer down. The next thing you learn is like essential dignities, okay? So you hear about Mars rules Aries and Venus rules Taurus, blah 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 blah. And after you learn the domicile rulerships, you learn about these other amazing mystical things called the other essential dignities. So you're taught, usually, if you plunge your way into classical astrology, you are taught that there are 5 essential dignities, which are namely the domicile dignity, dignity by exaltation, triplicity, bounds, and decans. And that's it. And you're also taught, namely, that these are weighted in their values on a point scale that goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, respectively to how I just named them. Now, let me just start this off with saying that, this is going to be such a big overview about the theory of essential dignities, my personal views on how they can be best used and applied in practice, because that's my goal here, is like giving the practical tips about like what they're good for, what is the purpose of them, and where it's going to take you. And I just want to start off by saying, please don't weight the essential dignities. That's just a huge, this is a whole thing we're going to get into right now. Because when you're taught that something is more important than something else, what you do is over time you neglect it. You don't look at it, or you even go to say that it's not relevant, not valuable. But let me tell you something. For the ancients, the oldest period of astrology that we have records of, that where they were talking about these different essential dignities, bounds, decans, and all of that, they didn't weight them. The oldest Hellenistic authors not only didn't weight them, but some of them even said, Firmicus says, a bound comes first, then domicile, and then exaltation, okay? Manetho says the same thing. So when you actually look at the oldest sources, there's this huge emphasis on bounds, and then you get, authors like Maternus, who transmit these doctrines on the decans from the Egyptians, that literally say he's like, the 36 decans rule and decree over the fate of every event that manifests in our sphere of Earth. The decans are the most supreme rulers of the cosmos. So why would this thing just get 1 point? That's my question here. And in my book, it doesn't. So the whole idea in my philosophy is, and that I hope, and that I think more and more people are seeing and are agreeing upon, is that we shouldn't just put another hierarchy of things, another patriarchal way to say this is stronger or better, because that's just not how it worked ever in the earliest parts. Okay, maybe it did a little later on. And the thing is, you're kind of taught this now as it's like, maybe you'll hear some astrologers be like, well, it's like a training wheels, you can kind of start off with it, but maybe you don't use it after. But don't even start with that. Like, don't even start. Because if you get in that habit, or if you don't, like, come to look and, like, reflect on that thing, you're not going to value it over time. And you're losing and missing out on so much. The bounds, the decans, and the triplicity are literally some of my absolute favorite things about astrology, period. Like, those layers have so much information to tell you. So what I also want to say is, like, it also just doesn't make sense as training wheels, because it's like giving us like training wheels where one is like small and the other one is like double the size, and you're like, we're riding a crooked tricycle. Like, it's not a helpful base practice to go off of later on, because like I'm emphasizing, you're going to neglect major pieces of information in the chart, because here's my crux, here's the thesis, guys. A planet in its own bound is just as good as a planet in its own sign. Period. A planet in its own decan is just as good as an exalted planet. Okay? Because here's the thing. Each dignity assesses and tells us about a different realm of life. It gives a different power. It gives a different vibe to the chart. So when we just put them all on a level playing field and say, no, it's active in this unique power, then there's no scaling of strength. It's just that it's in its power and it symbolizes this. Okay? So here's level 1. Being able to measure and see and learn about how to determine when a planet is in one of its dignities. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2 is the much longer process, which again, down the road, I would love to talk about all these things with you guys. But it is about actually learning about the symbolism of all the 60 bounds, all the 36 decans, about using the triplicity rulers of the houses and triplicity rulers of a single planet to delineate topics over time. This is, that's the next level. Okay, so the main point here is that when you see something in its own dignity, it has its own story. It has something to say and address about the situation. So there's no point in calling it off as irrelevant or minor or weak, okay? And that's my other gripe here, is that they're called minor dignities. You have major dignities, domicile and exaltation, and then you have minor dignities, triplicity, bound, and decan. And let me tell you, in my guidebook, which I wrote last year on the basics of ancient astrology, I still called them that. And I had a good reason that I defined them for, because I didn't come up with yet the words that I want to use for them. And I still haven't now. But let me tell you my reason why I called them that. I did group them differently though. And I have here's my point. The major dignities cover the rulership of 30 degrees of a whole sign. So the domicile lord of a sign covers the whole sign. So the moon rules over all 30 degrees of Cancer. In the same way, Jupiter and the exaltation lord, so Jupiter for Cancer, rules over all those 30 degrees. And on the third tier we have triplicity rulers, which actually rule over 120 degrees, because they rule over a whole element, which means they rule over 3 signs simultaneously. So, when we consider here major and minor, in my book, literally, but like in my mind, the distinction is about dignities that cover a whole sign versus dignities that begin to break the sign into smaller portions. That was my distinction in separating them. I specifically said they shouldn't be weighted and that they're just as valid though. I did still use the terms major and minor because, like I said, I haven't come up with the terms yet that I want to describe that. And I'm working on it. We can throw things out there. Maybe it's hard because I'm not going to say complete and incomplete because they're not incomplete. They just represent a smaller portion. Okay, here's my point 3 of this topic of theory, and then there's a 4th, and then I think we're done. But again, I hope you guys are enjoying. I'm just soapboxing here. Like, these are just my off-the-cuff thoughts and feels about essential dignities. I hope y'all are enjoying it. Anyway, point 3. This is, you're taught that there are these 5, and that's it. Guess what, honey? There's a lot more than just 5. Because here's my theory on essential dignity. For something to be essentially dignified, because again, there's this whole question of after you learn about what is a planet, and then you start to learn about the combination of the planets and the signs, okay? The 7 planetary spheres and the 8th sphere, as we talked about in the first episode. So what does it mean when, this planet is found in this place of the circle, right? That's the intermingling and intermixture of this whole process, which births the nature of discovering and measuring, quantifying essential dignities. Now, with that being said, you start off learning and you learn how to delineate each planet and each sign, right? You learn Venus in Aries, Venus in Taurus, Venus in Gemini, Mars in Taurus, Mars in Cancer, Mars, right? And, you go through all of that, and then you're kind of left with this, cookbook picture of, well, what do I say about this? And then you kind of regurgitate the same things. And then eventually maybe you learn about the bounds and decans and you can make more specific statements. But here's the crux. Here's the most important thing to understand about essential dignity. And it's going to open us into why there's more than just 5 dignities. That's because essential dignity is about sympathy. Sympathy. That means is something like something that it's with. Does something like to be that thing that it's like? Does something like to be in that thing? I don't even know what I'm saying right now, but maybe, hopefully, I'm conveying the idea that sympathy is the main engine of essential dignity. So when we want to measure how comfortable something is, how strong it is, how supported it is, we have to measure whose area it's in. And so, over time, we've come up with these systems to say this is signifying this area, okay, as a whole sign. But here's my point. Guess what? A dodecatemorion, okay, this 12th division of a sign into 2.5 degrees each, just as strong. If a planet's in its own 12th part, just as strong as being as in its own sign. If a planet's in its own 9th part, okay, just as strong as being in its own sign. If a planet's in its own degree, its own monomorion, just as strong as being in its own sign. If a planet's conjoined to a fixed star of its own planetary nature, just as strong as being as is in its own sign. Seriously, I mean that. Because again, this brings me back to, they each have a different story to tell. Each level of rulership has a different level of a meaning to convey. So think about like the way that you respond to your parent and the way you respond to your boss, okay? Like, you still respond, but it's two totally different interactions here. They tell two totally different stories. They happen in two totally different ways. So all of the essential dignities have different scenarios for how that communication works. Okay, now, again, the point is that when something is supported in its own light, it's conveying something. It's not only lighting up and saying, hey. Okay. So, my final point is that, what's my final? Oh, right. So, now that we have understood that each region is simultaneously experiencing all these layers and levels of power, this is all about what's called co-rulership. So in the ancient books, they talk about co-rulership or co-management, which means that, like I was saying, the moon rules over all the 30 degrees of Cancer, just as much as Jupiter rules over all the 30 degrees of Cancer. They both manage it and respond to it. So when that mom that is, away from home, she's still responsible for her home. Even if she's not there to tend to the child that's at home alone and maybe making a mess. Mars in Cancer. I'm talking to you. When she's not there, she has to respond from afar. She has to be able to pick up the call. But guess what? She can only pick up the call when she can see her home. So when these planets aren't able to aspect their houses, aren't able to aspect their bounds, aren't able to aspect their decans, their exaltations, their fixed stars. Yes, even aspects to fixed stars that planets rule. Hermes talks about it. We'll get there, but it's in the ancient texts. When planets can't witness them, it's weaker, because anything situated there is fending for itself. So imagine little Mars at home, running a mess, flooding the house with overflowing toilets, whatever. It's like the landline is cut off. He can't even call mom. He can't call moon if she's not able to witness the place. So Jupiter can maybe come in and save the day. But Jupiter's got to be able to see Cancer. So if the moon is, let's say, in Aquarius, while Mars is in Cancer at home, maybe Jupiter in Scorpio from the trine is going to alleviate things. Don't worry. Okay? So this is co-rulership. Planets are simultaneously in charge of all of their bounds, all of their decans, all of their houses and exaltations in 12 parts and single degrees and everything else in fixed stars. It's all there. So the point of doing and being a good astrologer literally just boils down to what's getting activated and what's the ruler doing to that thing. That's it. Then you're going to spend the next years, and you'll come along with me because I'm always learning more about these layers, learning about what each of those levels do and what it means for different rulers on different levels. How are Mars decans different than Saturn decans? How are Mercury-Jupiter fixed stars different than Venus-Saturn fixed stars? Because they are. How are Venus-Saturn fixed stars different than Saturn-Venus fixed stars? That's a whole other conversation, alright? So again, this is a primer into my musings on what is essential dignity really about, What is that mechanism of sympathy that drives the cosmos to communicate, to light up, to be harmonic, to say, hey, listen to me, I've got a story to tell. And that's the basis for being a good astrologer. Being a good, succinct, technical astrologer is measuring as these essential dignities. Okay? There are so many other ways, though, to pull information out of the chart. From angularity, from heliacal phases. Again, we'll talk about all that juicy stuff. But essential dignity is like a huge part in it. And again, it all has to do with sympathy. It's way more than just a 5-point scale, and there's way more than just 5 modes of dignity. So people are like, a 12th part, it's not an essential dignity, but it's still like another layer. I'm like, no, it's doing the same thing. A planet in the 12th part of Scorpio, its 12th part is ruled by Mars, okay? That is the same mechanism of being in the bound of Mars, or the house of Mars. It's just a different level, which means it has a different function. So, there's way more than 5. Planets are always responsible for all of their claims, all of their territories, and they get activated to tell their story when that planet can witness it, when that ruling planet can witness its own thing. Which doesn't necessarily have to necessitate a planet or lot or angle being in that thing. So, here's an example. If Mars is in the first decan of Leo, okay, which is ruled by Saturn, he's making a square ray into Scorpio in the first 10 degrees, because he's in the first decan of Leo, which means he's sending his ray into his own decan. Even if there's no angle or planet there, that's activating the decan, the symbolism of the decan. You can talk about that with someone. That's going to be relevant. If, what's an example? If Jupiter is from 5 degrees of Aries, sidereally, making a trine to 5 degrees of Leo where Regulus is, guess what? That's huge. That you can't not talk about that. So look, planets make aspects to their places they rule, and when something's sitting there, you jump on talking about that thing. That thing becomes so powerful. So, I'm going to cap it off there. We've talked about a lot of things. I've dropped a lot of seeds for where we're going to go in the future. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed episode 2 of Astro Basics. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!